If you're watching on YouTube, welcome to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast. If you're continuing on from the men's race recap, this is the women's Amstel Gold Race recap, 115.5 kilometers from the Valkenburg, where it starts, to the Breggen to Vleuten, and there's 3 climbs. So in Netherlands at the moment, they have to do a closed circuit. That's why the women's race finished at about 7:45 p.m. Brisbane time and before Benji gets up in Europe time. And they do 3 main climbs, just like the men's race, same circuit. The Gerlemerberg, Bemelerberg, and the Karlberg. Karlberg, you obviously know from 2012 World Champs, normal Amstel. And yeah, there's not as much climbing as you'd normally expect in Amstel Gold Race. Same for the men's, same for the women's. Winner of the last edition didn't happen last year, happened in 2019. Kasia Newiadoma. So skipped last year, but now we've got Vos here, changeovers, Van der Breggen, Van Vleuten and Movistar, people changing teams, all the favourites, ELB and the leader of the Women's World Tour. But Benji, you were watching before TV broadcast started. What happened early in the race with about 100 Ks to go?
The benefit of a parkour like this means that there's a lot of attrition already throughout the parkour itself. You see a lot of attacks every single circuit that they pass through. And that's also why I kind of like this, because you can have a big move at the start that has a huge group that gets away while the favorites are perhaps not really looking at it too much. And then it turns out there's riders from every team in there. And that was a thing that happened today. We had at roughly 100K to go, a 23-women group that launched off, including the likes of Lucinda Brand for Trek Segafredo. We had pretty much one rider for every team that matters, except for like Movistar in there. So yeah, it's a strong group. It was a group that was seen as dangerous because everybody on social media was like, oh, this gap is growing. Oh, 1 minute, 1 minute 15. This is actually getting dangerous, because obviously the likes of Van Vleuten and Sofov didn't react to this yet because it's 100K to go, but somebody had to react in the back, and it only happened a good 18 kilometers later once that group had still a significant gap. It was Van der Breggen who upped the pace on the second Karlberg of the day. She actually ended up splitting that second group into pieces. And yeah, very early. But it's also kind of necessary due to the fact that this group had Lucinda Brand from Trek Segafredo as potentially the most dangerous rider in there. So SD Worx had to do something, and it seems like their go-to option was using Anna van der Breggen to do so. Perhaps the choice there was related to the fact that she was ill a week and a half ago, and she wasn't sure whether she would make it to the start of this Amstel Gold Race. And perhaps she's trying to get into it with a role that is not necessarily the one they trust on for the victory, and thus is on a domestique duty today more than she was actually a leader for the team. I think that might be the reason, because otherwise we wouldn't see Anna van der Breggen taking over control so early on in the race. Is that also roughly what you have in mind for the reason there?
Yeah. I think Demi Vollering, she'd be a leader. If she was on Park Hotel Valkenburg still, she would be their out-and-out leader. So SD Worx are blessed with her, as well as if it's a slower race, Chantal van der Broek-Black. I think Grace Brown, judging from the Core Vos photos I've got, which you should see on screen if you're watching on YouTube, Grace Brown marked that Anna van der Breggen move. So she was looking really strong early and will come to the fore later in the race. But yeah, you want to continue on, Benji?
Yes, that group eventually came back together with some people that dropped earlier on, and this group also ended up catching that front group with the likes of a Faulkner for Tipco doing a lot of the work to try and catch back that front group of 23. Was 18 left or something, wasn't the full 23 in the end when they got caught. But all in all, with 60K to go, everything is relatively back together. An 80-rider pack, roughly. And those next few circuits were attacks left and right, with the likes of a Jackson doing a lot of attacking, Royakkers attacking, Brown attacking. And it wasn't really that anything was sticking. There were reactions every single time. And perhaps a 2-women group would form, and then it would be caught a bit later. So, yeah. In general, the race was relatively under control, and it would really start to kick open again with a good, I think, 35 kilometers to go on the Karlberg. Is that where you think the race really exploded?
Well, you had Brown ahead, and Van Vleuten, like, Brown had attacked before. She looked good. We know she's good from Liège last year, and she's been so strong this year. She win a race yet this year, Benji? Or I can't remember. But Brown's look
Grace
so
Brown
good.
won, was it Dwars? No.
Yeah. No, Van Vleuten won Dwars. Depana. That's it. Yeah, I knew she'd won a race. Yeah. Van Vleuten, she would attack early on the Cowberg before even the steepest section. She did that on this ascent with about 35 Ks to go, and she would do so as well without her team having led her out to the base, setting it single file. But anyway, her attack did create a lot of problems because Anna van der Breggen dropped. Maybe, given what Benji's mentioned about her sickness, not a big surprise. She was not that far back at the start of the Cowberg, but yeah, that Van Vleuten move countering Ruyakas, basically it showed who had the legs today, but it didn't cause a decisive split. Then they had this sort of undulating, false flat, nasty section after the Cowberg, exposed as well. Continuing attacks. Benji might have already mentioned Audrey Coldon-Rigaud had attacked a couple of times. Trek were keen to make the race difficult. And then Grace Brown attacked again with 27 Ks to go, marked by Ruyakas, but Brown looked much the stronger and no one was really chasing. And as Benji's mentioned, she's won Depana. She chased Lizzie Deignan nearly down in Liège last year, and I feel like she won Brabantse-Pijl last year, Benji, as well. She definitely was on back-to-back Ardennes podiums last year and can go long. No one was chasing her. And were you surprised, Benji, with SD Worx having multiple riders in the group and Trek had at least three or four in the group, that they let Brown had such a long leash for even over 20 kilometers?
Yeah, I find having Grace Brown on a solo ride or even a duo ride still, that is a dangerous thing to happen. And if she gets a gap of like 30 seconds, then I'm starting to wonder why they don't kick in earlier, because now they're eventually having to kick in anyway, because otherwise this race is lost for their team once they, simply don't have a rider in the front. That's Liv and Trek you have up there. No, wait. Bike exchange,
Liv.
Sorry. So Bike
so
exchange and Liv were in the front
in the
group,
comments.
Trek was not. SD were. Yes. SD Worx had those four riders. You're right. Montpassio already showing the entire day that she was up there. Not necessarily the causality of moves, but she was always there when she responded to groups and was always in those elite groups that formed throughout the parkour. So she was looking good. And Vollering also still there. Van der Breggen was not there, as you mentioned. So the thing is, they have the riders, and they chose to do that later than expected. I would have expected them to respond earlier towards Grace Brown. That's quite simple as that. And it was really on the Cowberg itself with 19K to go where the reaction started actually happening, I think. They were pacing a tiny bit beforehand, with Trek taking the majority of the work on themselves. And Mavi Garcia ended up setting a pretty high pace at the start of that Cowberg. Montpassio took over, and SD Worx started helping out from that point onwards. They started setting a pace, and then second attack, or probably the third. There was another one in there. In between
AVV
throughout the
again.
parkour somewhere. But Annemiek van Vleuten, go ahead.
Well, this is what I mentioned in my Brabantse-Pijl men's video recap, that when you have breaks in these races, these one-day races, whether it's Ardennes or even like Brabantse-Pijl, which is like an Ardennes Light or Cross Cobble Classic, sometimes it's good to have someone like Grace Brown up the road. And I'm surprised Movistar didn't pace hard before that Cowberg, the penultimate Cowberg, with about 19 Ks to go, to bring the gap to something bridgeable for Van Vleuten. But it wasn't. It was 30 seconds. That's not going to be bridgeable on the Cowberg alone for AVV, and unless Grace Brown completely cracks, which she wasn't looking like doing. So that's AVV basically putting in effort for nothing. All the favourites were right on her wheel. Kasia Newiadoma was right there. Magnaldi tried to attack from the peloton. We finished the Cowberg. They have put 15 seconds into her, 15 Ks to go. Brown on the descents, Benji, I think she was stronger than Royakas on the uphill as well, or just particularly on the flat, but on the descents, she put a lot of time into Royakas and she lost the wheel, and that was it. I think she's one of the most efficient riders in the peloton solo on this sort of undulating terrain. 10 Ks to go, 30 seconds for Brown. We've still got another circuit. We've got the Cowberg to do before the finish. And I think Trek Benji were trying to call SD Worx bluff. I think they were trying to make them, they say, you're the strongest team, you pace, you do the work. Why should we have to do the work? And we haven't mentioned her name yet. She's in this group the whole time. She's been looking good on the Cowberg. Marianne Vos, no teammates for sure, but she's just sitting in this group, sitting pretty. Trek and SD Worx, all the responsibility, no pressure on her to chase anything down. And ELB's in that group too, and the Ks are ticking down. So for someone like ELB, when are you going to attack if you're going to catch Brown really late? Trek keep working, as Ben said, and then we hit the last Cowberg, 2.5 Ks to go. Grace Brown closed down. How did you see that last Cowberg again, Benji? Was it rinse and repeat for Van Vleuten? Just kind of, I don't know, thrashing about at the start, not even the steep section.
Yeah, it was really surprising. That group came together to the wheel of Grace Brown right at the bottom, and that makes it beautiful because that reminds us of races that come together towards the end and then start exploding in the final few kilometers. And that option was here. We saw the last meters before the Cowberg, Van Vleuten moving up and making that move, bridging the 5 meters that were left to Grace Brown's wheel, and she just hammered it. And when I say hammered it, like, she made that move from the single meter at the bottom of this Cowberg, and she kept pedaling. And the others in her wheel, not necessarily in her wheel, there were a few gaps opening up behind. The entire group is falling apart. It was basically 1v1v1 for everybody. And it was, I think, Newiadoma, the winner of last year's edition, that was one of the riders that was best at responding to Van Vleuten there. And we also had ELB, Elisa Longo Borghini, in a photo 12 wheel at that moment. Uther Pludwig and Savov nowhere near the front. Marianne Vos was already in a good position as well, like you mentioned. I think, yes, in front of Elisa Longo Borghini at that point. Yes. But the thing about Vos is we know that she has this kick, but an entire length of a Cowberg versus the punchers that can do more climby stuff is difficult. So she has to go pretty hard at the bottom to try and follow, and then she has to try and reduce the damages, a bit like a Michael Matthews would do on the men's edition, for example, where he would need to try and follow the attacks a lot, and once the real punchers come out on top, then he needs to try and reduce the damages to try and kind of crawl back towards the end of the Cowberg on the false flat section towards the end. And I think on this Cowberg, the gap was getting larger, and the first riders, Annemiek van Vleuten, was getting in trouble. She wasn't looking that bright anymore, a good 75% into the Cowberg, and it was Newiadoma that pushed forward past Van Vleuten and actually hammered it, dropped Van Vleuten. Longo Borghini ended up passing Vos, ended up passing Van Vleuten, and eventually we had Newiadoma at the top, having a good 5 meters, 10 meters on Longo Borghini that crawled back very strongly towards her, and we had a two-women group at the front of the race, and everybody behind kind of formed and bolstered into a chasing group at the top, and that's with roughly a kilometer and a half to go.
That's right. Kilometer and a half to go. Just remind ourselves who are in these groups exactly. Newiadoma and Longo Borghini, the ones who are the strongest on the climb, but not the quickest sprinters ahead. You've got a tired AVV, SD Worx with multiple riders behind, as well as Paladin there, Mavi Garcia. And they got Vollering for the sprint, SD Worx, but Marianne Vos is in that group. Needs no introduction. She's in that group. She's going to be the quickest if it comes back together. Newiadoma gets to the top, does a short pull, notices that ELB is with her, flicks her arm. ELB says, no, I'm too tired, and then attacks her. So from 1,500, now she's basically pulling on her own. Newiadoma is having to close her down. And she looked cooked. It was tiring her out. It took her ages to close her down, but she managed to do it eventually, getting into the last 750 meters, 800 meters. The gap is now 5 seconds to the group behind. We've got a flat finish to Amstel Gold Race. Newiadoma goes to is pulling a little bit, does it pull, flicks ELB, and ELB says no. Refuses to pull at all. We've got Marianne Vos in the group behind. And it gets to the point where Newiadoma is pleading with her. She's on the side of ELB. She's like, I'm not going to ride the whole way to the finish. I will pull, but you can't just expect to sit on the whole way. You're wearing ELB, the leader of the Women's World Tour points ranking jersey. Like, you're not someone I can just destroy in the sprint if I lead you out. And yeah, ELB basically completely scuppers them. We'll talk about it in a second, but yeah, 500 meters to go. You can see what's happening. SD Worx are closing them down. Newiadoma is basically freaking out, justifiably, being like, what the hell? They're going to catch us now. Starts to half pull, but it's too late. SD Worx pulls it back easily with about 300 meters to go. They've got Vollering third wheel. ELB slides back to that group and then sprints from the front of it with like 250 to go. Makes no sense. Sprinting from the front of that group, being like, no, beating just Newiadoma head-to-head would be too easy. Let me sprint against 10 women. Vos, she goes, so ELB drifts to the left-hand side of the road. Vos slips into the left-hand side, gets her slipstream, kicks out of it. If you see it on the overhead, absolutely destroys everybody with her initial kick. And it was only close because Vos posted up Alaphilippe style very early and Vollering came back to her wheel. But she still beat her. She still beat her by a wheel, full wheel. But it looked closer because the speed differential with Vos posting up. But what are your thoughts on that finish, Benji, particularly ELB's decision-making?
I think the main factor here is that we understand why she wouldn't pace in the first place, in the sense that if, for example, you're in a group with Newiadoma, who is arguably on paper a stronger sprinter, not by much, but a stronger sprinter. She won the sprint 1v1 versus Van Vleuten last year. But the factor there is that it's also a short gap. So you either pace a tiny bit and then start sitting in the second wheel with a good 700 meters to go. You can't do that from 1.4K out, knowing that the gap is so little. And additionally, if you attack that rider, that you literally say to, nah, I'm going to sit in the wheel. You say, no, I'm not going to take over. And then I'm going to attack a second later on the right side of the road. And then when you're caught, you're like, no, I'm not pacing. How naive are you? Yeah, how naive are you? Like, this ain't going to work. 99% of the people that you're in the group with, after you get attacked, I would never pace with that person anymore. I would be like, do it yourself now. Like, at this point, if you don't want to pace, then I'm not going to pace either. Like,
she was willing to work 50-50, even after that.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, even with that work, with her doing alone, then Longo Borghini would have ended up trying to swamp her in the end. So she knows that if it's not 50-50, it's not going to be a fair finish here. And if I keep pacing with Longo Borghini on my wheel, I would never do it. But from Longo Borghini's standpoint, I don't get the naivety where she thought after attacking Newiadoma that Newiadoma would still be interested in doing all the work alone. That's just not realistic. Like, I don't know anyone that would do that. Like, I had a counterexample in the men's edition of Milano Sanremo this year where Søren Kralnersen was pacing with Stuyven and that ended up causing Stuyven to be able to also take the race. But that's different because Stuyven didn't attack Søren Kralnersen there. And yeah, then it's expected that, I just don't get it. In the end, I just don't get it. Like, yeah.
Well, especially for SKA, coming second in MSR is a massive result. And he knew even if he didn't pace, he would probably get beaten by Stuyven in the sprint. So he was just like, I want a podium spot. ELB wants to win. And even if you think, and I don't think Newiadoma is shown to be a particularly good sprinter this year. Van Vleuten destroyed her in Dwaalstoel of Vlaanderen, despite Newiadoma having a perfect draft right on her wheel for 200 metres. Newiadoma got beaten by multiple bike lengths. ELB beat her by 15 bike lengths in the finish here, and judging from how hard it was for Newiadoma to come back to her after her attack at 1500, I think ELB should have had a pretty good tell that she was stronger than Newiadoma. So all she had to do was just offer her a little bit of work and not sit up completely. They would have beaten that group. I could see it happening in real time. If you let that group come back and your ELB, you lose 99.5% of the time. 99, maybe more. Voss, I mean, you may have heard of her before. From a reduced bunch, she's going to fucking destroy you. And she did exactly that. She won so easily that she nearly lost because she posted up with 50 meters to go because she gapped everyone so badly. And if you're ELB in that group, you're not the one that might beat her. And then she let out the sprint from 200 to make no sense. So why not take, even if you have no confidence in your sprint, the 30% chance of beating Newiadoma in the sprint? The 25% chance. I think it's more than that personally. I think she would have had 60 to 70% chance of beating her. And worst case, she comes second. So what she did made no sense. It was irrational. It wasn't like clever gamesmanship that could have worked for her. I think it's worse than Fuglsang and Alaphilippe at Amstel Gold 2019 because MVP was closing that gap. It was such a big gap. They didn't really know accurate time checks. Whereas here, they knew SD Worx had multiple riders and they were pacing just behind. They knew, or should have known, Voss is getting brought to you by SD Worx sitting in the wheels. And that's why after the race, apparently, according to Thijs Zonnevel on Twitter, Longo Borghini, Newiadoma said to Longo Borghini, "Fuck, Elisa, why?" And maybe that we should make the title of this video on YouTube, that, Benji. But yeah, any last thoughts on Trek, ELB? Is this something you've seen in other races this year that surprised you? Some weird tactics?
Yeah, I think we mentioned in Gent-Wevelgem that we were surprised how they went ahead and formed an echelon, and then once they had the numerical upper hand in that echelon, they didn't ride the echelon, causing Longo Borghini to eventually go solo and remove their numerical advantage on the competition there while the sprinters were behind that group. And that was a tactical mistake from my opinion, or perhaps a mistake in the echelon. We don't know what the real cause is there, but it's not ideal there. And I think in the Tour of Flanders, there was another example that I brought up, but I can't think of it right now anymore.
It was ELB.
One thing I did want to mention is...
after she refused to chase AVV, she sat on the whole time and then helped in the last 3Ks. And we were like, okay.
Yeah, but the final thing I want to bring up is that I feel like Vollering's sprint is getting better. And I think we've noticed it over the last, not only this year, but also towards the end of last year, where it was slowly getting better. And right now, she sprinted really strongly in the sprint. She was in 5th, 6th position, and she basically maneuvered through the peloton, through the, elite group, not really a peloton anymore. And the way she got out of that position and ended up having such a speed to come next to Ariane Vos, that's not a non-existent name, but Marianne Vos, really impressive. And I think that this is just, we've spoken about it so much last year, that Vollering is becoming such a very strong all-round rider, and they were basically waiting for her to win the big race. And from my viewpoint right now, I believe that big race is coming this week.
Big shout. Well, particularly with AVDB not looking as good. But here's the final results, the full top 10. Vos first, Vollering second, Van Vleuten third. Netherlands lock out the podium. Spratt fourth, Paladin fifth, Mavi Garcia sixth, Ludwig seventh, Longo Borghini eighth, Moolman ninth, and Newiadoma 10th. Big shame for Newiadoma. She deserved at least another podium. She was the strongest on the Cowberg and, was willing to race. I think bike exchange with Spratt behind, maybe Brown attacked too early and was too active because Spratt is never winning the sprint against anyone, unfortunately. So she'd need to go clear on the Cowberg and then stay away, I feel like. Yeah, but Brown, speaking of Brown, this is her results this year, Benji. Australian national champs, second in both the road race and the ITT, eighth in Omloop, second in Danelith Corsa, first in Brugge de Pana, 22nd at Gent-Wevelgem when they were running for Sarah Roy, sixth at Dwars d'Or, third at Tour of Flanders. Like, that's incredibly... The only rider probably with better results this year are AVV, and that's only in the last couple of weeks, and Vos, because Vos has seventh at Strade, second at Trofeo Alfredo Binder, third at GP Oettingen, one Gent-Wevelgem, 12th at Flanders, and one today. So, yeah. I mean, any last thoughts on this race, Benji? How it will affect, maybe expand on what you were saying about Vollering for later in the Ardennes?
Well, I think just in total that Vollering is becoming so all-round. We know that she was it second or third on Flèche Wallonne last year, so she's really fitting for that parkour. But if she is already showing that she's getting better at the sprinting part of things, then she can also end up winning, for example, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, where it has hills and then results in a bit of a sprint at the end between a few people, unless they have a solo rider at the front of the race. We also saw her attack solo quite a few times this season already, and I just think that it's just a matter of time before she wins something. And on paper, Flèche Wallonne is the most fitting now that Van der Breggen is not on the table as a head favorite for that one. But yeah, will they decide to give her a chance anyway? Because it would be 8 times in a row. I don't know. But all in all, I think this parkour is honestly more enjoyable than the normal Amstel Gold Race parkour.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I didn't get that.
I don't know.
Could you try again?
My watch just thought I was speaking to it.
Yeah, I'm not editing that out, Benji, because your watch is saying Benji. I'm not sure about that take. Maybe for the women's race, Benji, we'll see. Men's race hasn't happened yet because it's got a lot less climbing than men's race. I think the women's race, it was fine, but yeah, I don't know about that for the men's race. But let us know if you're watching on YouTube or on Twitter, if you're watching or listening on podcast players. What did you think about ELB's decision-making? Do you think Trek have thrown away some podiums this year in the Cobble Classics and now in Amstel? I think they definitely have. You know, Dwars d'Or and Gent-Wevelgem, I think one top 10 result with Van Dijk, 10th at Dwars d'Or when they rode for her. No one in the top 10 at Gent-Wevelgem. So, yeah, some questionable stuff there. We'd love to hear your thoughts about that and what you thought about that. This women's race, Marianne Vos is as good as she's ever been. She's flying. Jumbo-Visma got to be very happy with her. And we got the men's race starting in a couple of hours. Maybe they're hoping for a lockout of the top step with Wout van Aert or maybe Roglic later. But we'll see, even though you're probably listening to this in reverse order. But that's all from the women's Amstel Gold, and we'll see you later. Ciao.